let me summarize what I'm about to show, which is, well, I've been working on a Blazor application for a personal project. But for those of you who have experience with Blazor, it's static, of course. So you define components, but the contents that you show, you would have to fetch it from your server using Ajax, for example. But what I really wanted to be able to use is use an existing backend. So in this case, Orchard Core. But I also wanted to be able to leverage the flexible design system so that I can use the composable content type system of Orchard and render it client-side without having to create a separate component for each and every content type. So I started a little experiment, and I will show you each part of it. And the first part of that I think is interesting is this menu. So as you can see, this is based on the standard Blazor project template. But what's different here is that this menu comes from the server. And for your information, this is a WebAssembly Blazor application, but it also works with server-side Blazor, which is easier in terms of debugging. But it doesn't matter which mode hosting model you choose. But yeah, let me show you this menu, which is managed here. So I can, for example, change the order of the menu items and then publish this. And I notice I moved the about menu item. And if I refresh this, it's also now in this location. And
so the template you mentioned, did you put it in your web project? Is it a module?
Yeah, so I'm using Orchard Core as a fully headless CMS, not a decoupled CMS, but headless, which means it's Orchard is a separate instance, a separate application, and the Blazor application is also, it's a separate solution, so it would be hosted separately. It would be served from a separate container, for example. And this is the structure basically.
Too small.
Too small.
Control plus, does it work in Rider? Can you zoom everything? Okay, that's there.
Yeah. So the structure is as follows. So here we have the application, and this is shared by both the Blazor client host and the Blazor server host, which are just shells, really referencing the meat of the application itself, which contains the app Razor component. And this is fairly basic, with the exception that this is set up in a modular way, which means that as part of the library that I'm building, it contains a bunch of modules. But we'll get to that in a second. I first want to show the menu, which is here. So the Nav Menu component that comes with the default Blazor template. But what I'm doing here is I'm using my own Orchard Core. Well, it's not Orchard Core. It's I call it Blazing Orchard. That's the project name, which is its own component coming from a library. And what this thing does, it uses another component, which is what I call content item view, which under the covers fetches data from Orchard using a HTTP client. And what's interesting is it's reusable, which means you can use this also, for example, in my content page, which has a wildcard match, which means it will match any URL that's not defined here as part of the Blazor application. And then I use this as a handle into the content item view so that it will be able to load any content item from Orchard. But what's interesting is that what it gets back from Orchard is just a JSON object, but I'm using the same concepts, the same mechanisms as Orchard Core to render this content item into components. So not using, using shapes as the intermediate layer, because, well, if you're familiar with shapes, you know it's very flexible. I'm using the exact same system here, but instead of rendering it to Razor views, I'm rendering it to Razor components. So what you'll see is if you look at the URL here being changed, this all comes from the Orchard CMS. Excuse me. Well, I haven't implemented all parts, such as the list item part hasn't been implemented, but it's a start. And what I think is really interesting is that, for example, if you look at this counter component that comes with the default Blazor template, you can actually use Liquid to render a shape that gets rendered as this component. So, for example, this counter button is the component I just was clicking on. Now, if I go to the backend and I go to this counter liquid page, this is just liquid, but notice that I'm using the shape new filter to create a counter button shape, which I then render. And it's not just rendered as a string, it's actually rendering as a fully functioning component. And if you look at the component, for example, I'm exposing a public property as a parameter. So I can do things like in this way, I can use the CMS to configure not these components, but also, of course, position them anywhere I like. So I can, with
sorry to interrupt. Can you zoom globally your editor, because we already can't see that? So this screen is fine, but the editor is already unreadable.
Yes,
can
sure.
you do it once?
Yeah. So let me change the display settings, but I will have to restart sharing probably. We will see. Can you still see my screen, or is it very broken now?
No, we can still see it, and it's better.
Okay, good.
Then I want to understand what happened. So here it's a razor component.
This
with
is
the default of click me button text.
Correct. Yes. So what I did here in this liquid thing, I'm rendering a shape, and this is
shape new. So you are creating a current button shape, and you are changing the property button text to click me. So you have a new shape of type counter button with a property button text click me, and you say shape render, and it will render. So what's the template for this one? Counter button. Where is the template for counter button?
So this component, it represents the template of that shape. So
but it's what I'm saying is that I want to understand how it works. So on the server side, I see, well, so on the server side, there is a liquid page.
Yes.
The liquid page says render a counter button shape.
Yes, but this, for your information, this liquid template is rendered client side. So it's rendered within the Blazor application.
Client side.
Client side, indeed. Yes. So client side.
Because you copied some code. Okay, because it's WASM, so you copied some C# code from Orchard to do that.
Dude, I copied a lot of code from Orchard core into Blazor.
Okay.
So it has things
that
like.
Explains. So it's really running on. So you are loading the liquid page content item as
Exactly.
is. You're not trying to execute it. It's just, oh, give me the liquid page. And because it's a liquid page, you said so the WASM is actually executing the liquid page shape.
Exactly. So it's indeed, so the liquid page is a content item which has a liquid part which is rendered client side using a driver. So we're here. So there's a liquid part display which creates a liquid part shape. Does a bunch of interesting things. So this is the magic that makes it actually work to be rendered as a component using a render tree writer. In any case, so it uses the Fluid library to parse the liquid syntax, and then I'm passing in my own text writer to intercept those statements that are being emitted, and so that I can actually render it to the render tree builder, which is a Blazor API. So that's what's going on here. And of course, another interesting part is how does the shape get rendered into a component? And that's what the shape renderer does. So here's the shape renderer. And what it does, it gets a shape table so that it can find all of the, well, it's basically a big dictionary between component type names, or actually shape names and shape alternates. And they are then, this method tries to map it to the correct, most appropriate component type. And the default convention is that the component type name, if that matches shape name, then that component will be used to render. But you will be able to specify more specific components using shape alternates, which I will show you in a second. But
so
that's
you're instantiating a Razor component from the shape instance.
Yes,
and you
exactly.
map the properties of the shape to the Razor component.
Exactly, that's what happens here. So here, when I render a component, I'm getting a component type to instantiate the shape that's supposed to, that represents the model of the component. And here I'm getting all of the public properties of the shape. And then I'm trying to see if this component has a property with the same name that's also marked with a parameter attribute. If that's the case, I select the shape property, and then this is the list of public properties on my shape that I can safely assign to the component. So this is manually building the components using the render tree builder, and that of course gets then rendered by Blazor. And it works pretty nice. So as you saw, it works for the counter button. But because of the shape system, I can also do things like here I have content parts. So I have a component called special block title part, which does nothing at this moment because I'm not explicitly rendering it anywhere, but I can associate it with a shape. So in this case, I can associate it with a shape alternate for the block content type. So whenever the title part is being rendered, the shape also gets an alternate using the content type. So here I'm taking advantage of that to customize the rendering of the block content item. So this title part here will be changed if I restart the application.
So do you need shapes because Razor components can't change their templates dynamically?
I don't know if that's the case, but the reason I went with shapes is that I wanted to have a similar experience to what we use with Orchard Core when you theme an application. So what's that?
It's bad.
No, it's one of the best things of Orchard is the shape system.
That's good when you are like 200 IQ like you, but not everyone is like you, so it's hard.
I maybe, but I also made it easy. So for example, so you saw that this has changed now, but I also made it easy, for example, to because I understand that it can be very complicated to figure out what shapes are emitted and what templates to use for that. But you can also, if you are writing a Blazor application and you just want to take over rendering of some part or even a content type like the article content type, you can just take over. Of course, you need to understand this shape type here, so there's no way around that. Maybe we can simplify it by skipping shapes or using some default convention. That would work.
Last weeks, I've been trying to find ways to not use shapes at all.
Oh, really?
That's what I'm saying. And if you watch the meetings, you will see, because we talk about what will happen if we didn't have shapes on the front end, not back end, because we need shapes for the back end, but for the front end at least. And also trying to find, so Dean also worked on a way to create components with shapes, and then we looked at Razor components, but we didn't look at it during a Tuesday meeting, but during a Thursday one, so it was less visible. So we looked at Razor components, and what was missing from the Razor components in 3.1, which will be fixed in 5.0, actually. So I think there are other ways, and I will show you some stuff, and we'll talk maybe offline about it. The issue with shapes is not shapes; it's the fact that nobody understands how it works, and then it looks like magic, and people are lost. That's the issue. So that's why I'm wondering if there is no other way to do that, what you're doing without shapes, or what you try to get from shapes, and if we can't just get that from shapes without having to take the full baggage.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That would be interesting, and I think that will be possible. But yeah, my default thinking was shapes. Also, in Orchard we have Liquid, which has shape helpers. But of course, it's also easy to create a customized Liquid filter that directly maps to a component, and that way we can then render the component, provide attributes or properties to that component. Yeah, so that will be interesting to discuss further offline. That's the reason I went with shapes. It was my default option.
A few weeks ago, however, we had a demo from William about Razor, and he asked about support for Blazor in Orchard Core. And what I said was what we needed was a set of Blazor components that will connect directly to Orchard Core to render the content from Orchard Core. And I gave the example of a company who made that for Xamarin Forms at that time to build mobile applications that will render articles directly from the content in Orchard. And that's what you did. You have your content item component and your menu component. And I think that's great. So you said you were using GraphQL or the REST APIs?
That's a very good point. I wanted to use that initially, but there are some limitations, not to GraphQL, but in order to get the content definition, the content schema, that wasn't exposed, or at least I couldn't find it. So what I did is I created a server-side module, an Orchard Core module that exposes a couple of endpoints, one to get content items. Also, this prevents app use because by default, if you wanted to be able to use the items controller or one of those API endpoints, you have to allow anonymous access. But the API controller also allows, I believe, some updates. But of course, I only want read access in this case. So I created my own endpoint to get a content item by a handle, and also to get content types, so that I can use that on the client side, so that I have the necessary metadata to create the various shapes. But of course, this is just a module to be integrated into Orchard if it's interesting, but it's also very easy to just add it to your own project. So this is an Orchard Core project, or actually it's just an ASP.NET Core project that references Orchard CMS.
So in your content item component, is there a Razor fragment that I can change the body of the content item?
Can you repeat that question?
So in your content item component, can you open the component? Okay. Let me check the parameters. So, there is a Razor fragment type that you can use in a component.
Yes. Oh, yes. No, it's not a templated component. It's not. It could be, though.
Should.
Why?
Well, this way, when you create a page, you can say, inject my about page here, and this is the way I want to display it with the properties or whatever.
But just to make sure I understand, so the way it works right now is that this content item view accepts a content item that it will render. Actually, it will fetch it by handle. So you specify the content handle as a parameter. And then if it's specified, then it will fetch it from from the API from Orchard, and then if it receives it, then it will build a shape for it, and that shape will be rendered using a shape view.
And then you need to be able to render a content item. So it's Orchard, but on the client. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And with shapes, shapes themselves are, can have child shapes. I didn't implement zones yet, but at this point I didn't need it. But the setup, since it's a big copy of Orchard Core, it's easy to add a zone holding behavior and that sort of thing. And then you get the ability to inject other shapes into that. But yeah, maybe there's a more modern or clever way with by using components, because as you say, Blades components support render fragments so that you can template them that way.
Okay. Is that all your demo?
Pretty much, yeah. You got the gist of it. So all of these things are various types of content items. So this is markdown that gets rendered. This is written article that I wanted to show, and functional components. Yes, so this is my demo.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's interesting to see how you can run some part of Orchard inside WASM, and
it really blew my mind that to just be able to run all of those things on the client. So basically pushing down server-side rendering of contents all the way to the client side.
Cool. Thanks a lot.